Tonight we step back into the steady rhythm of an empire of color, sound, labor, and ritual. But we will not begin in a temple, nor in a palace, nor on the battlefield. Instead, we will begin in a place far more ordinary and far more alive. The Aztec Marketplace, specifically the Grand Market of Tlatelolco, the largest and most bustling commercial center in the Valley of Mexico. At its height, Tlatelolco thrummed with thousands of voices, the scent of roasting maize, the rustle of woven cloaks, the gleam of obsidian knives, and the measured pace of barter. It was the true heart of the Aztec economy, a place where cacao beans served as currency and tribute goods from across. The empire flowed together in a quiet storm of activity. But while the Aztec world was rich and complex, it was also a world of rigid structure, sharp hierarchy, and subtle danger. To step into this marketplace, truly and completely, was to step into a world very unlike our own. And so, as you settle in, let your body rest. Let your thoughts slow. For the next 2 hours, we will gently explore what it was really like to live, trade, work, pray, rule, and survive in this vast, sophisticated society. And as always, we begin with the question, why wouldn't you last a day? Segment 1. Why you wouldn't last a day in an Aztec marketplace. You awaken just before the sun crests the edge of the Great Lake, and its twin city Tlatelolco rise from the mist like a dreamland island of stone and canals, of pyramids and markets. You are not a noble, not a priest, not a warrior. You are a simple seller, a tianquitlani, heading to the great marketplace to sell your wares. Perhaps dried fish, woven mats, or ears of maize from your small plot. You hoist your bundle onto your back, supported by a woven mecha pole across your forehead, and begin the long walk along the raised causeways. Already, the city hums with motion. The canals shimmer with canoes laden with produce from the chinampas, the floating gardens, and the air is warm with the scent of cooking masa and wood smoke. By the time you reach Tlatelolco's open square, thousands are already gathered. The market is immense, capable of holding up to 60,000 traders on feast days. Its scale is overwhelming. You find your designated section, each type of good has its place, and begin setting up. There are no price tags. Everything is bartered or bought using cacao beans or small cotton cloths. If you do not know the subtle language of trade, the correct courtesies, the expected hand gestures, you will struggle. A poor trade could shame your family. A dishonest one could land you before the stern market judges who sit in a raised structure, watching silently. Your senses are flooded. The buzz of conversation rises like birdsong. You hear offers, rejections, laughter, disputes. Nearby, someone sharpens a blade. Further off, the dancers begin to perform before a small shrine. You catch the rich scent of roasted chili and turkey stew, but you cannot linger. You must watch your goods. Theft is rare but harshly punished. You must not doze. You must not speak disrespectfully. You must not cheat. The eyes of the Tianquitpan, Talayacankth, the market officials are everywhere. And now, as the afternoon light slants across the plaza and the long shadows stretch between the vendors, we leave the marketplace for now. Let the sounds fade into a gentle hush as we prepare to walk deeper into the heart of the empire. Segment 2. The rise and fall of Moctezuma II, an emperor caught between worlds. He was not born a commoner, nor was he fated to be obscure. Moctezuma Xocoutza, known to the world as Moctezuma II, was born into the royal line. Of a descendant of warriors and rulers, priests and strategists, his childhood was shaped by discipline, his education overseen by tutors of the highest order. He learned to speak in metaphors, to chant prayers, to lead men in battle, and to observe the divine rhythms of the gods. He was not the eldest son, yet in time he was chosen by merit, by omen, and by political need. When he rose to the throne in 1502, Moctezuma was in his early 30s. His ascension was celebrated with feasts and sacrifices, and his name was spoken in poetry and song. He ruled not as a distant tyrant, but as a Tlatoana, the great speaker, a king who was also a conduit between the earthly and the divine. His was a role of immense gravity. He was expected to maintain the fragile balance between war, tribute, nature, and the gods. And for a time, he succeeded. Under Moctezuma's early reign, the Aztec Empire reached its greatest extent. He oversaw a complex web of tribute states stretching across central Mesoamerica. Warriors marched under his banners. Tribute flowed into the capital: cotton, cacao, feathers, jade, obsidian, and captives for sacrifice. The empire was not a single unified nation, but a mosaic of pressure and persuasion. Moctezuma knew this. He governed not just with authority, but with anxiety. Strange vessels on the eastern shore, pale men with beards, clad in iron, thundersticks, horses, beasts never seen before. Moctezuma sent emissaries with gifts, hoping to pacify, to understand, to delay. Among these strangers was a name Moctezuma did not yet know, but would never forget. The Spaniards approached slowly, deliberately. Along the way, they made allies of enemies. Collins, long opposed to Aztec rule, joined them. When Moctezuma finally allowed his men in 1519, he welcomed them with ceremony and gold. Some say he believed was the god Quetzalcoatl returned. Others argue he was simply acting with calculated diplomacy. The truth, like so much in history, may lie somewhere in the quiet space between. What is known is this: Moctezuma received with honor. He housed the Spaniards in one of his palaces. He offered gifts, spoke through interpreters. But he was soon made a prisoner in his own home, still treated with outward respect, but watched, guarded, slowly stripped of power. The empire began to fray. Riots stirred in the streets. Sacrifices resumed in desperate measure. In 1520, during a festival, the Spanish massacred Aztec nobles and priests. The city erupted. Moctezuma, brought before his people to calm them, was struck perhaps by stone, perhaps by blade. He died shortly after. The Spaniards claim the Aztecs killed him. The Aztecs claim the Spaniards did. No one truly knows. What is certain is that with his death, the fragile illusion of peace collapsed. The empire descended into siege. In less than a year, once called the Venice of the New World was in ruins. The temples burned. The causeways choked with the dead. The old gods silenced. Moctezuma, once emperor of millions, died as a captive. His memory was cursed by some, mourned by others, and twisted by history into something both tragic and uncertain. Was he weak? Wise? Overwhelmed by forces he could not understand? Or merely a man trying to hold together a world that was ending? As you drift now deeper into calm, imagine the quiet that followed his death. The echoes of footsteps in the ruined palace. The darkening sky above Lake Texcoco. The wind carrying away the last breath of an empire. And in that silence, the story of Moctezuma still lingers, not as a warning perhaps, but as a reminder of how swiftly the ground beneath our feet can change. Segment 3. The Mystery of the Chinampas. Floating Gardens of Genius. If you've drifted across the shimmering waters of Lake Xochimilco in the early dawn of the Aztec Empire, you would see not only canoes gliding silently between reeds, but the astonishing outlines of floating plots of farmland neat. Rectangular islands stitched into the lake with patience and brilliance. These were the Chinampas, often referred to as floating gardens, though they did not float in the sense of drifting rafts. Instead, they were rooted in shallow lake beds, tethered to stakes, and lovingly built up by human hands over generations. They were among the most remarkable agricultural feats of the ancient world, ingenious, resilient, and essential to the survival of a city of hundreds of thousands. To understand Chinampas, you must first imagine the Valley of Mexico as it was before conquest, a basin, filled with interconnected lakes, surrounded by volcanoes, and home to dozens of thriving city-states. The Mexica, or Aztecs, settled on an island in Lake Texcoco in the 14th century. The land was poor, marshy, and limited, but the people who came here were not deterred. They saw potential in the mud, in the reeds, in the stubborn shallows. And from that potential, they built a system that allowed their empire to flourish. Chinampas were created by staking out a rectangular plot in shallow water, then piling it with layers of mud dredged from the lake, decaying vegetation, and refuse. Over time, the mixture became fertile soil. Treesophanawotch willows were planted along the corners to anchor the bed. The result was a stable, nutrient-rich platform of land, constantly replenished by the lake itself. Water flowed freely between the plots, allowing for easy irrigation and access by canoe. With this method, even as the island city grew crowded, food production kept pace. The beauty of the Chinampa system was not only its productivity, but its sustainability. Because the lake provided constant moisture and nutrients, Chinampas could yield multiple harvests per year. Crops like maize, beans, squash, chilies, tomatoes, and amaranth were grown in rotation. Flowers such as marigolds and dahlias were also cultivated, both for market and for ritual. Every plot was a tapestry of life, buzzing with bees, humming with insects, shaded by tree canopies, and bathed in golden sunlight. Work on the Chinampas began early. A typical day started before the sun rose. Farmers Chinamahanicas paddled their canoes from the city docks out to the fields. They wore simple cotton garments and wide-brimmed straw hats to guard against the heat. They carried tools made of wood and obsidian and baskets for harvesting. Upon arrival, they would inspect their plots, clear weeds, water the plants if needed, and check for pests. The work was steady, rhythmic, and deeply attuned to the seasons. But these were not solitary spaces. The Chinampas were alive with movement. Entire families worked together. Children carried small bundles of seedlings. Elders offered advice drawn from years of quiet observation. Birds nested in the reeds. Frogs croaked in the ditches. And sometimes distant drums and flutes from the temples could be heard over the water, carried on the wind. Other times, only the soft dip of paddles, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of growing things. These agricultural islands were not just for survival, they were for trade. Much of the produce grown here was brought into the Tlatelolco marketplace. Canoes arrived in waves, laden with squash blossoms, red chilies, plump tomatoes, and fragrant herbs. The abundance was staggering. Even foreign merchants marveled at the sight. The Spanish chronicler Bernal del Castillo wrote of S market and food supply with wonder, noting its scale and sophistication. But behind the abundance was a system of relentless labor and careful stewardship. Chinampa farming required constant attention. The lake had to be dredged. Canals cleared of algae. Plots rotated and replenished. The success of the city's food supply and the empire's ability to sustain itself rested in the hands of these silent, unsung cultivators. The empire's grandeur, its temples, warriors, and poets, all depended on these quiet rectangles of soil and water. The Chinampas were also sacred. The earth itself was revered, seen as the body of the goddess Tonantzin, our revered mother. To plant was to honor her. To harvest was to receive her blessing. Offerings were often left at the edges of the plot's flowers, droplets of pilque, kernels of maize. Before planting, farmers might whisper prayers into the wind or consult the sacred calendar to choose the most auspicious day. Work was intertwined with ritual. Yet even in such harmony, challenges loomed. Droughts occasionally struck. Floods overwhelmed plots. Insect swarms descended. Farmers adapted, modified, rebuilt. And in the final years before conquest, another danger appeared, one that could not be repelled with dikes or willows. When the Spanish invaded, they saw the Chinampas not as marvels, but as curiosities. They failed to understand the delicate relationship between land and water. And soon, under colonial restructuring, many Chinampas were neglected or drained. The canals clogged. The rhythms of planting were disrupted. And gradually, the floating gardens began to fade from the center of urban life. Today, remnants of Chinampa systems still exist. particularly in Xochimilco, where tourists glide in painted boats through narrow canals once crowded with harvesters. Some modern farmers, inspired by ancient methods, are reviving the system, using chinampas for organic farming and environmental education. In this way, the floating gardens live on not just as ruins or curiosities, but as a living legacy of resilience, balance, and quiet ingenuity. As you settle further into stillness, imagine yourself drifting slowly along a canal at sunset. The water glows with the reflection of distant clouds. A heron lifts into flight. Somewhere a farmer bends to inspect a maize stalk. Round you, green islands float gently on the surface of the past. There is no engine, no noise, only oars, water, breath. This, too, was a kind of empire not of conquest, but of care. Segment 4. Priests, warriors, and artisans. Life in the Aztec social pyramid. Imagine for a moment that you were born not in a small hut along the canals, nor within the swirling commerce of the marketplace, but into the carefully measured steps of Aztec society itself. The empire was not an egalitarian world. It was shaped by hierarchy, and every individual man, woman, child was born into a precise place within its grand design. This structure was not accidental. It was sacred, ordered, and reinforced at every level, in clothing, in diet, in language, and even in how one walked or sat in the presence of another. At the very top stood the Tlatoani, the emperor often simply called the Great Speaker. He was more than a king. He was a living bridge between gods and people. Below him were nobles, the Pippleton whose wealth, education, and bloodline gave them access to land, fine garments, and political office. They held leadership positions, advised the emperor, and served as high-ranking warriors or priests. Their sons were educated in the Comicac, learning not only history and astronomy, but how to command with dignity and perform rituals with precision. The warrior class was both feared and honored. Warfare was integral to Aztec identity, not only for territorial expansion or political dominance, but also for capturing prisoners for sacrifice. Young boys trained early in the art of combat, first with wooden weapons, later with obsidian blades. Coapili, or eagle warriors, and the Ocelapili, or jaguar warriors, wore fierce costumes and fought bravely on the battlefield. Valor in combat could raise one's status, even for a commoner. Success brought prestige, gifts, and the right to wear specific feathered capes or sandals with gold soles. Priests, meanwhile, lived austere lives, devoted to ritual, astronomy, calendar keeping, and sacrificial rites. They fasted regularly, performed bloodletting, and memorized sacred hymns. Their world was governed by cycles of divine timing, and they bore great responsibility. Miscalculating a feast day or misinterpreting an omen was not merely a mistake, it was a cosmic danger. Priests were often trained from a young age, and their days were measured by incense, chant, and the slow turn of the sacred calendar. And then, the artisans and craftsmen-skilled individuals who, though technically commoners, were held in high regard for their abilities. Featherworkers created radiant cloaks and headdresses from hummingbird and quetzal feathers, so delicate that a single piece might take weeks to complete. Stone carvers shaped gods from basalt and jade. Painters and scribes recorded history in vibrant pictographs. Metal workers, though rare in the Aztec world, shaped copper into tools and ceremonial objects. These artisans worked in workshops, often attached to temples or noble estates, their hands preserving the memory of the empire in every woven thread or carved line. Beneath them were the Walton, the backbone of Aztec society. These were the farmers, laborers, porters, and general workers who performed the daily tasks that sustained the empire. Though often modest in possessions, the Walton held dignity in their work. They paid tribute, attended communal duties, and raised families. Many of them owned small plots of land within their calpuli, the neighborhood units of society where they built homes from adobe, grew food, and lived lives of ritual and routine. Life for women was structured but vital. While Aztec society was patriarchal, women were not passive. They controlled household economies, wove cloth for tribute, sold goods in the marketplace, and acted as midwives and healers. Some, especially in noble families, became priestesses or temple attendants. Girls were educated in schools and taught to be industrious, modest, and spiritual. A good woman was praised not only for her obedience, but for her ability to feed, clothe, and maintain the ritual purity of her household. There were those who existed outside the ideal structure. Slaves, or tlacatan, were not always born into bondage. Many were debtors, criminals, or captives. Yet slavery in the Aztec world was not always lifelong. Slave could own property, marry, and even buy freedom. Some volunteered for slavery to pay off obligations. Still, they occupied the lowest rung, and their lives were subject to the will of masters or the whims of the marketplace. The social pyramid was not completely fixed. Through bravery in battle, excellence in craftsmanship, or dedicated service, one could rise in status. But these were exceptions, not norms. For most, the class into which they were born shaped nearly every aspect of life, from the thickness of their clothing to the type of house they lived in, and even which gods they were expected to honor most fervently. Ritual and rank went hand in hand. Nobles might sponsor grand feasts and sacrifices. Farmers might offer maize or incense. Artisans painted deities, priests invoked them, and warriors honored them in combat. The entire structure was bound together by shared religious understanding, each tier of society supporting the others like steps in a pyramid, both literal and spiritual. Yet despite the strict hierarchy, there was cohesion. Each class depended on the others. The emperor needed the tribute of farmers. The warriors needed the weapons of artisans. The priests needed the astronomical observations of scribes. The people of the Altpetal shared a belief that they were upholding a sacred order, feeding the gods with their work and devotion, ensuring that the sun would rise again. As you rest now, let your mind gently imagine a city waking up. Warriors stretching in the barracks, priests lighting incense at dawn, artisans unrolling brushes and feathers, women grinding maize by the hearth, and farmers setting out for the chinampas. All different, all vital, all moving within the great wheel of the empire. Segment 5. Markets of blood and flowers, the role of sacrifice in Aztec belief. To understand the heart of the Aztec world, you must understand that it beat with rhythm, with offering, and with blood. But this was not brutality for its own sake, it was sacred duty. A deep and complex spiritual relationship between humans and the gods, between the seen and the unseen. In the Aztec mind, the universe was not static. It was fragile, dynamic, constantly in motion, and constantly in need of sustenance. That sustenance came in many forms: prayer, song, dance, incense, and yes, sacrifice. The Aztec world was created not once, but 5 times. Each age or sun had risen and fallen. Current sun, the 5th sun, was believed to be unstable, destined to end like the others unless it was nourished. The gods themselves had once sacrificed themselves to bring the sun into motion. It was now the humans' turn to return the favor. And so, the ritual act of giving life, of feeding the divine, became central to Aztec religious thought. But sacrifice did not always mean death. It could be the offering of food. Bowls of maize, tamales wrapped in green leaves, fruits and cacao beans. It could be a song, beautifully composed and offered before a temple at dusk. It could be a paper banner, cut in the shape of a deity, held aloft and then burned. Flowers, especially marigolds, were considered precious gifts. These offerings filled the great temples and humble homes alike. This was a world that honored both grandeur and simplicity. Yet at its core, the most powerful offering was life itself. Human sacrifice was not casual, nor hidden. It was ritualized, precise, and often public. The offering was prepared, clothed in finery, adorned with feathers and paints, treated with reverence. The sacrifice was conducted by priests trained in technique and chant, and timing their actions to the sacred calendar and celestial positions. The victim was seen not merely as an individual, but as a vessel of cosmic balance. One of the most important gods receiving such offerings was Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war god. He needed strength to fight darkness each night and rise again. To sustain him, warriors captured on the battlefield were offered on high temple platforms. Their hearts lifted to the sky before the stone knife fell silent. It was an honor, not a punishment. To die as a sacrifice was to be transformed, to accompany the sun, to return as a hummingbird, to exist forever in divine light. Not all sacrifices were martial. The Tlaxcala festival honored Zip-Totec, the god of renewal and spring. Captives were bound and made to fight ceremonial battles before being sacrificed. Others were flayed, their skins worn by priests to symbolize rebirth. It was to modern eyes unsettling. But to the Aztecs, it was necessary a vivid cycle of death and renewal, tied to planting seasons and cosmic harmony. Self-sacrifice, too, was common. Priests and nobles practiced bloodletting with obsidian blades or stingray spines, offering droplets of their own blood to the gods. It was not done in fear, but in love, in duty, in rhythm with the divine. Even the emperor was expected to draw blood from his ears or tongue during important rituals, reaffirming his role as both sovereign and servant. Children were sometimes offered to Tlaloc, the rain god, especially during droughts. These ceremonies were accompanied by music and incense, and the tears of the children were believed to encourage rain from the heavens. It was not an act of cruelty, but of deep necessity, seen through the lens of survival and sacred exchange. Every drop of water that fell on the chinampas was, in the Aztec mind, a gift repaid. The Templo Mayor, in the central temple of the empire, had two shrines, one to Huitzilopochtli, one to Tlaloc. It was here that the most important rituals were held. Pilgrims gathered, dancers performed, priests ascended the steps with offerings. From the top, one could see the entire city, the lake, the volcanoes. The gods were close. Yet sacrifice was not merely for the gods. It was woven into the calendar, the agricultural cycle, the very way the Aztecs understood life. To live was to give. To give was to maintain order. The empire was, in a sense, a sacred machine, and sacrifice was its fuel, its prayer, its poetry. Foreigners did not understand. The Spanish were horrified. They saw only the blade, the blood, the spectacle. They could not see the meaning behind the gesture, the cosmic humility, the faith that the universe must be nourished through action. In time, the Spanish dismantled the temples, silenced the chants, and buried the altars beneath churches. But the ideas endured in stories, in symbols, in quiet echoes passed down through generations. Today, the word sacrifice often means giving something up. For the Aztecs, it meant holding something sacred enough to give back, not as loss, but as offering, as balance. And now, as you lie still, listening to the slow turning of time, imagine yourself walking softly through the temple courtyard at dawn. The air is thick with copal smoke. The drums are low, steady like a heartbeat. Flowers are laid in delicate spirals on the stone. The sun begins to rise, golden and endless, welcomed by those who gave everything to keep it burning. Segment 6. Living on Lake Texcoco, the city that touched the sky. Imagine waking at first light in a city that floats, not in the sky, but on water, the jewel of Lake Texcoco. The air is cool, kissed by the mist that clings to the lake's surface. Your home is modest, made of adobe and cane, with a reed roof and a clay floor. Through a small window, you glimpse the sunlight glowing against the volcanoes in the east, and eternal sentinels on the horizon. This is not a myth or dream. This was the daily life of tens of thousands of people who made their home in one of the most extraordinary cities the world had ever known. Rose from a marshy island at the heart of the valley, built stone by stone, canal by canal, into a vast metropolis of more than 200,000 residents by the early 16th century, rivaling or exceeding the size of any European city at the time. The city's layout was precise, designed with cosmology in mind. Its 4 main districts aligned with the cardinal directions, converging in the sacred center where stood the Templo Mayor and the imperial palace. Every street, causeway, and waterway was part of a sacred map, echoing the Aztec vision of the universe, orderly, symbolic, and interconnected. Each morning, the city awoke in waves. Merchants loaded their goods into canoes for market. Children accompanied mothers to fetch water or grind maize. The cries of waterfowl mingled with the splash of oars. Along the causeway's massive stone roads that connected the island to the mainland porters, pilgrims, warriors, and nobles moved in steady rhythm. Bridges drawn up at night for protection were lowered at dawn, the lake wide and glimmering, reflected the movement like a giant mirror. The city itself was a marvel of urban planning. Canals served as streets, navigable by canoe, allowing residents to float from one neighborhood to another with ease. Chinampas, those floating gardens, surrounded the city, providing a near-constant source of food. Waste was removed daily, used as fertilizer, or carted to distant dumps. Fresh water, filtered through aqueducts from mountain springs, flowed into the city. Bathing was common, and many households had their own small steam baths, called tomaskals, used for hygiene and ritual cleansing alike. It was not only clean and efficient, it was beautiful. Houses were painted in soft hues. Courtyards were filled with flowers and songbirds. Temples gleamed with lime plaster. Gardens, both public and private, overflowed with dahlias, sunflowers, marigolds, and maize. In noble households, fountains trickled gently while scribes worked under shaded awnings, recording tribute or composing poetry. Even the simplest homes reflected a quiet dignity, with small altars, clay figurines of gods, and bundles of dried herbs hanging from ceiling beams. Public spaces were busy, but orderly. In the center of the city stood the great market of Tlatelolco, capable of hosting tens of thousands of traders. Nearby, schools Kamakak for nobles, Telpochcali for commoners echoed with chants, instructions, and the sounds of training. The Kamakak taught astronomy, divination, and oratory. The Telpochcali emphasized discipline, farming, and military skills. Education was universal, mandatory, and gendered boys and girls alike were trained to fulfill the roles expected of them in society. Religious life permeated every aspect of the city. The Templo Mayor dominated the skyline, twin temples rising like a mountain above the urban sprawl. Each day brought new offerings, chants, and ceremonies, many open to the public, others reserved for priests. Processions, music, incense. The city was alive not just with commerce and conversation, but with a sense of divine rhythm. Calendar stones dictated the timing of rituals. Dreams were recorded, omens were observed, even the movement of ants or the cries of owls carried meaning. Not far from the temples stood the imperial palace, where Moctezuma and other rulers had resided. It was a world unto itself, dozens of rooms, courtyards, aviaries, zoos, and kitchens. Diplomats from across Mesoamerica came here to deliver tribute or offer allegiance. Servants moved silently between chambers, carrying cacao, preparing baths, delivering messages. But even within this grandeur, the line between secular and sacred was thin. The emperor did not rule as a man alone. He ruled as the chosen intermediary of the gods. Yet despite its size and sophistication, the city was not without hardship. Droughts could dry up the canals. Hurricanes could flood entire districts. Social unrest simmered beneath the surface. Tribute from conquered peoples sometimes came at the edge of a blade, and resistance was punished severely. Still, to the average resident, life was ordered, full of ritual, labor, and community. One's days followed the rhythm of the sun, the market, the festival calendar. Food, while simple, was nutritious and varied. A morning meal might consist of maize porridge, sweetened with honey or spiced with chili. Midday brought tamales, beans, squash, or roasted fish. Tortillas were a staple, warm, soft, folded around anything and everything. Cacao, often mixed with chili or vanilla, was both a treat and a sacred offering. Dining was communal. Meals were often eaten, sitting on woven mats, shared with family or neighbors, under the shade of clay-tiled roofs. At dusk, the city softened. Smoke curled from chimneys. Canoes docked for the night. Children played with toys made of clay miniature animals, spinning tops or tiny drums. Lamps were lit with pine resin or tallow. The night sky above Lake Texcoco shimmered with stars. And the people, in homes or temples or markets, rested trusting that the sun would rise again, that the gods would be fed, and that life in all its beauty and duty would continue. As you drift now into deeper rest, let your thoughts linger on those quiet streets, the glimmering canals, the warmth of adobe walls, the scent of maize and smoke, and the soft sounds of voices in the night. This was not just a city, but a cosmos in miniature, a place where the earth met the sky, a place where people built a world not only to live in, but to honor. Segment 7. the Aztec calendar, a world shaped by time. To live in the Aztec world was to live according to the heartbeat of time, not as we know it, with weeks and weekends, but as a tapestry of sacred cycles, each thread interwoven with gods, nature, and destiny. Time in the Aztec mind was not linear, but circular. It turned, returned, and folded back upon itself like a great serpent swallowing its tail. Days were not empty measures, they were alive, each one ruled by a deity, filled with specific energies, carrying omens and influence. At the center of this vision were two calendars, the Tonal Puili, or the sacred calendar, and the Shupo Wali, or the solar calendar. Together they shaped not just daily life, but the entire worldview of the Aztec civilization. The Tonal Puili, meaning count of days, was a 260-day cycle made up of 20-day signs and 13 numbers. Every day was a unique combination of hair, a flavor, a tone. You might be born on 5 reed or 12 house, and that would define your character, your fortune, even your fate. It was used primarily for divination and religious purposes. Priests known as Tanalpauk studied these combinations, interpreting dreams, advising on naming children, choosing marriage dates, and timing ceremonies. Every number and symbol had meaning: rabbit, jaguar, wind, rain, and more. Each echoed a force in the universe tied to myth and god. Parallel to it ran the Shupo Wali, the solar calendar of 365 days, divided into 18 months of 20 days, plus a 5-day period called the Nemen Temi, which was considered ominous and unsettled. Each month had its own name, festival, and patron deity. These were not abstract months like January or March, but deeply seasonal, agricultural, and mythological. For example, Tlaxcalpalisli brought the festival of renewal and sacrifice to Ziptotec, Etzalcoatlisli honored Tlaloc and Chalcutlic, gods of rain and water. Each segment of time was not only measured, it was performed, marked with rituals, dances, fasting, and offerings, where the two calendars overlapped. Cycle of 52. Solar years, known as the bundling of years, was one of the most sacred phenomena in Aztec belief. At the end of this 52-year cycle, the people feared the world might end. All fires in the empire were extinguished. Darkness fell over. Priests climbed the hill of the star carrying offerings, waiting to see if the stars aligned correctly. If they did, a new fire was lit in the chest of a sacrificial victim, and from this flame, torches were sent across the city, rekindling hearths, temples, and hope. The ceremony was called the New Fire Ceremony, and it symbolized cosmic renewal, the rebirth of time itself. This belief in cycles extended beyond calendars. History was read as repetition. The past did not merely inform the present, it returned to it. Moctezuma, upon hearing of Spanish ships, believed the god Quetzalcoatl had returned, not because he lacked judgment, but because history had already foretold such a return. The cycles spoke louder than the evidence of eyes. For the common person, these calendars touched life in quiet ways. A farmer might choose planting days based on the sacred cycle. A midwife might chant invocations tied to the day of a baby's birth. A merchant traveling between cities would avoid journeys on inauspicious days. Even meals, prayers, and household cleaning might be timed with attention to favorable energies. Time was not a silent current in the background. It was an intimate companion, a guide, a warning. And yet this devotion to time was not restrictive, it was poetic. The Aztecs composed hymns that addressed time directly, calling it a mirror, a wind, a flower that blooms and withers. They knew impermanence. They spoke often of the fleeting nature of life. We only come to sleep, we only come to dream, one poem says. Our house is not here. We must leave it behind. And so, the tracking of time became not just a matter of ritual, but a meditation on mortality. Their great sun stone, sometimes called the Aztec. Calendar stones, not a functioning calendar in itself, but a symbolic map of their cosmology. At its center is the face of Tonessio, the sun god, with his tongue extended as a sacrificial blade. It's encircled by glyphs of previous suns, day signs, and directions. It was not a timepiece, but a worldview carved in stone. It is vast, circular, and filled with precision and myth. Today it rests in Mexico City's National Museum of Anthropology, But once it lay at the heart of the Templo Mayor, visible to all, a reminder of the power and fragility of time. As dusk settles over the lake, and the shadows have stretched long across the canals, you might imagine a priest kneeling before his calendar mat, stones laid out to mark the passing days. He chants softly, consulting the codices, noting the signs. A festival approaches. Offerings must be prepared. The city will soon wake again into celebration. And you, gently adrift now, lie beneath your own sky of stars. Let the quiet rhythm of cycles, the dance of numbers and gods, carry your thoughts. In this world, time is not a ticking clock. It is a sacred breath, inhaling and exhaling eternity. Segment 8. Aztec Childhood. Growing up in the Empire, imagine. The warm glow of morning sunlight peeking through the reed walls of a modest Aztec home. In a small room, perhaps no larger than the spread of your arms, a child awakens to the smell of ground maize. The soft sound of a clay flute played by an older sibling, and the low voice of a mother offering prayer to the household altar. In this world, childhood was neither idle nor indulgent. It was preparation, devotion, and duty from the very start. From birth, Aztec children were welcomed with ritual and meaning. The day on which they were born, its name in the sacred tonal Pahuli calendar shaped their destiny. Priests or midwives would consult codices to interpret the child's fate, offering guidance on names, professions, and character. Even the umbilical cord was treated symbolically. For boys, it was buried on a battlefield, perhaps at a training ground, to link the child to future valor. For girls, it was placed near the hearth, binding her to the rhythm of the household and domestic life. Life began with ceremony, and that sense of ritual continued throughout childhood. Boys and girls were raised with discipline and deep respect for tradition. There was little room for rebellion or frivolity. Parents were stern, and punishment could be severe, though always embedded in a larger framework of education and community responsibility. Obedience, modesty, and hard work were the ideals instilled from a young age. A boy of 6 or 7 might begin his chores by helping in the garden, collecting firewood, or accompanying his father to the chinampas. As he grew older, he might train in basic martial techniques, practice carrying heavy loads, or sweep public spaces as part of communal service. Girls, meanwhile, learned to spin cotton, weave cloth, grind maize, and care for younger siblings. These were not minor tasks. They were fundamental to sustaining the household and fulfilling one's social role. Education was expected for all, regardless of status. Around the age of 12 to 15, children would enter formal schooling. There were 2 main types of institutions: the telpachali, for commoners, and the comicac, for the sons and daughters of nobles, or for particularly gifted youth. At the telpochkali, boys were trained in military discipline, agriculture, and ritual duties. They learned how to handle weapons, build homes, recite prayers, and respect elders. Discipline was strict. Mistakes were met not with harsh words alone, but sometimes with public labor or symbolic penance. In the comicac, education was far more cerebral. Students memorized long hymns, studied astronomy, learned how to read and interpret codices, and were trained in ceremonial etiquette. They might fast, observe silence for days, or rise before dawn to study the sacred calendar. Future priests, officials, and poets were formed in these halls, and their schooling could last many years. Girls selected for temple service received similar training in the arts of ritual, song, and healing. Yet even in a world so structured and serious, there was room for play and imagination. Children played games with clay figurines, practiced mock rituals, and ran through the alleys of the Kalpuli, the neighborhood communities. Simple toys like spinning tops, dolls, or miniature blowguns filled the quiet moments between chores. Some games mirrored adult activities. Others, like the ball game Tlachtli, had both recreational and sacred functions. Festivals, too, brought moments of joy and color. Children might wear costumes during feast days, participate in dances, or offer small gifts to the gods. They watched as their parents carried offerings to temples, as priests painted themselves in ash and red, as dancers moved in synchronized steps around burning braziers. In these moments, they absorbed not just entertainment, but identity. Adolescence marked a time of sharpening roles. Boys began formal warrior training, enduring physical hardship and learning battlefield tactics. A young man's worth was proven not just by strength, but by endurance and discipline. Girls by this age might already be betrothed, especially among noble families. Marriage arrangements were often made by matchmakers, and weddings were elaborate, involving several days of feasting, music, and symbolic acts, such as the ritual tying of garments to represent unity. Throughout this journey from birth to adulthood, family was the core. Extended kin often lived nearby or under the same roof. Grandparents shared wisdom, aunts and uncles helped with training. There was a strong sense of communal childering, where everyone had a role, and no one truly belonged only to their immediate family. The child belonged to the Kalpuli, to the empire, to the gods. For noble children, childhood may have included travel perhaps to visit other city-states, to study under important priests, or to observe military campaigns. For children of artisans, it meant apprenticeship learning to carve obsidian, braid reeds, shape feathers, or paint with natural dyes. Every child was molded not just into a person, but into a participant in a vast, sacred society. And so, as you rest now, imagine a quiet street in the early evening. A child carries a bundle of firewood, walking carefully along the canal's edge. Another sweeps the temple steps, pausing to watch a hummingbird dip into a blooming flower. Laughter rises from a courtyard where children play with small drums. The scent of roasted maize drifts in the air. In every gesture, prayer, lesson, dream childhood in the Aztec world was preparation for belonging, to family, to history, and to the gods. Segment 9. Flowers, song, and smoke. Poetry, art, and the soul and Aztec life in the heart of the empire. Beyond the marketplaces and the shadow of pyramids lived a quieter rhythm. It was the rhythm of Xochitl and Cuicatl, flower and song, the Nahuatl phrase that embodied art. Poetry and the fragile truth of existence. To live well in the Aztec world was not only to plant and fight, to build or pray, it was to feel deeply, to speak beauty, and to understand that all things, even empires, pass like mist under the morning sun. Aztec poetry was not a rarefied art for the elite alone. It infused public life and private thought. Composed in Nahuatl and often performed aloud, these poems were carried by memory and recitation. They were shared at feasts, spoken before gods, and carved into codices. Some were songs of love, others of war. Many were philosophical, meditating on time, loss, and the search for meaning. One of the most famous poet kings was ruler of Texcoco, a city renowned for its intellectual and artistic flowering. His poems, still preserved today, ask questions that echo across centuries. Do we truly live on Earth? Not forever on Earth only. A little while here. In his verses, flowers symbolize both life's color and its brevity. Birds sing not just for joy, but because their song bridges the human and divine. Art, too, was sacred. The Aztecs painted not just for representation, but for invocation. Images carried spiritual weight. Codices, books painted on deerskin or fig bark, combined image and text in intricate harmony. Glyphs conveyed names, dates, events, and prayers. Bright pigment threads from cochineal, blues from indigo and crushed stones. Yellows from flowers were blended into vibrant forms. Painters were trained in Comicac schools, taught not only technique, but ritual purity, for to paint was to echo creation. Sculpture adorned temples and homes alike. Deities carved from basalt or jade stood in plazas and shrines. Even the humblest clay whistle or figurine, crafted by a village artisan, held meaning. These objects were not decorative, they lived in the realm between the human and divine. Masks, whether worn in ritual or buried with the dead, transformed the wearer into something beyond. Featherwork, considered among the highest arts, used quetzal and hummingbird plumes, arranged into dazzling, delicate tapestries, worn by emperors, offered to gods. Music, ever present, wove through ceremony and daily life. Instruments were crafted from natural materials, flutes of bone or red, drums of stretched skin, rattles of seeds and shell. Each had a place, a tone, a purpose. The huetl, a tall drum played by hand, echoed in temple plazas during festivals. The tapanisli, a slit drum of hollowed wood, produced a resonant wooden pulse. Musicians and singers rehearsed in temple schools, learning sacred songs passed down for generations. But art was never for art's sake. It was always rooted in something deeper, yearning for harmony, for understanding, for connection with the gods. The concept of Teotl, the animating sacred force of the universe, imbued all creation. To make art was to mirror the gods' own act of shaping the cosmos. A poem was not merely words, it was an offering. A flower was not just pretty, it was a moment of divine truth. Even in conversation, speech was expected to be elegant, metaphorical, thoughtful. The Aztecs cherished formal language. They spoke in couplets, in layered images, using metaphor to express complexity. To say someone had died, one might say, he has gone to the region of the fleshless. To praise a beautiful singer, one might say she makes the flowers bloom again with her voice. Language itself was ceremony, and this sense of beauty extended to behavior. To live gracefully was to move with restraint, to speak with care, to show respect. Youth were taught to walk straight, to bow to elders, to refrain from gluttony or loudness. The ideal person was like the ideal flower brief, fragrant, gentle in the breeze. Temples were centers not only of sacrifice but of artistic performance. Dancers moved in circles, stepping in time with drums, their arms raised like petals. Costumes were bright with feathers and beads. Priests chanted poetry to greet the dawn, to ask for rain, to celebrate the return of the dry season. Every festival was both ritual and pageant. And amid these grand events, ordinary people composed quiet poems at night, watching the moon rise over the lake, wondering what the gods dreamed. Even death was framed in this language of beauty and return. Funerary songs celebrated the soul's journey. Flowers and incense were placed around the body. The dead did not simply vanish. They crossed into another layer of the cosmos, guided by dogs, comforted by prayers. Some were believed to return in the form of butterflies or birds. Memory, for the Aztecs, was not held in silence but in song. And so now, as you rest, picture a calm courtyard in Texcoco. A young poet sits on a woven mat beneath the shade of a flowering tree. He speaks softly, rhythmically, his words drifting on the evening air like drifting petals. A drum beats faintly in the distance. The scent of copal smoke curls above the rooftops. Across the water, a flute plays a gentle, winding tune. This was the Aztec soul, measured not in conquests or stone, but in verses and feathers, in the fleeting bloom of the world. A soul that sang, that wept, that listened. Segment 10. The Great Market of Tlatelolco, where the empire came to trade. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a vast open plaza, the morning sun rising above the mountains, casting long golden rays across thousands of people gathered in a vibrant, humming grid. You've come to the Market of Tlatelolco, the largest and most vital commercial hub in the Aztec Empire. Stretching further than the eye can see, it thrums with motion traders unloading woven baskets, buyers inspecting cacao beans, the scent of Chilean flowers drifting on the breeze. This is no ordinary market. It is a world unto itself. Tlatelolco was the sister city, too, situated on its own island in Lake Texcoco. Though politically separate for many years, the two cities became interlinked, with Tlatelolco specializing as the empire's grand marketplace. Spanish chroniclers like Bernal del Castillo marveled at its size and order, describing it as far larger and better organized than any market they had ever seen in Europe. At its peak, it could accommodate as many as 60,000 people in a single day. The layout was astonishingly structured. Vendors were grouped by profession and product, each assigned to a designated area. Here you would find a district for textiles, brilliant cloaks, woven from cotton and dyed with indigo or cochineal. Nearby, the spice sellers displayed mounds of dried chili, cacao, vanilla, and fragrant herbs. In another quadrant, artisans offered obsidian blades, turquoise jewelry, feathered fans, carved wood, and polished stone tools. Every category had its place, from pottery to live animals to cooked food. The food stalls were perhaps the most inviting. The aroma of freshly grilled maize tamales mixed with stews thick with beans, squash, and chili. Roasted insects delicacies in this world were sold beside baskets of avocados, pineapples, and tomatoes. Fish and duck caught in the lake were smoked or cooked over open flames. Women sat on mats, tending fires and preparing meals. their conversations mingling with the chants of traders and the rustle of bartering. Currency in this world was not coin, but cacao beans, quachadli, and obsidian blades. A small rabbit might cost 30 cacao beans. A good cloak, perhaps a length of quachadli. Buyers counted carefully, often with small pouches of beans hanging from belts. Trade was both local and long distance. Merchants called Pachteca traveled hundreds of miles to bring goods from the Gulf Coast, the Maya lowlands, and even what is now Central America. They moved in convoys, protected and respected, often doubling as spies and diplomats for the empire. To maintain fairness, officials known as Tianquitan Peaks Market inspectors watched over every transaction. They ensured prices were just, measurements honest, and conducts civil. Disputes were taken to judges who sat in raised platforms near the market center, ready to hear grievances. This sense of order, combined with the sheer scale, created an environment of remarkable efficiency and trust. The market was not chaotic, it was orchestrated. Even beyond trade, Tlatelolco was a place of information exchange. News from distant provinces arrived with merchants. Gossip flowed like water who had fallen out of favor. Gods were demanding new offerings, where the latest war had broken out. Musicians performed. Itinerant priests offered blessings. Healers sold salves made from plants and minerals. Fortune tellers whispered predictions based on calendar signs and ancestral spirits. Children darted between stalls, wide-eyed at the variety. Nobles veiled and escorted passed through with retinues. Commoners squatted beside their wares, patient and practiced. You might see a vendor coaxing a woman toward a pile of gourds, or a craftsman demonstrating how his obsidian knife could cut through thick leather with a single stroke. The scene was rich with motion, but also with ritualized. Everyone had a place, a rhythm, a role. Trade was not merely economic yet, it was spiritual. Many goods were offerings to gods. Incense, copal resin, amaranth, paper for rituals, and specially shaped bread were all available in abundance. Purchases might be made not for utility, but for honoring a deity. Market days themselves followed the sacred calendar, aligning commerce with cosmic flow. And when the sun began to sink in the sky, casting amber light across the plaza, the crowd would thin. Canoes, laden with goods, would slip back into the lake's stillness. Traders would fold their mats, count their cacao, and begin the journey home. The market would fall quiet but never truly asleep. Even in dreams, its pulse would echo the cadence of barter, laughter, footsteps on stone. So now in your mind's eye, rest beneath the simple awning of woven reeds. The air is heavy with the scent of dried maize and sweet smoke. Around you, voices murmur like a lullaby, fanless, familiar. You are wrapped not just in trade, but in the comfort of a society where the marketplace was not a place of chaos, but of balance, connection, and care. Segment 11. The Builders of Empire. Aztec Engineers and Architects. Imagine arriving in by canoe, drifting across the glass-like surface of Lake Texcoco in the early hours of the day. The city rises before you not in the distance, but as if it floats upon the lake itself. There are no horses here, no wagons rumbling on cobbled streets. The avenues are water. The crossroads are canals. This city, home to tens of thousands, is an engineering marvel, quietly shaped by centuries of ingenuity and labor. When the Mexica first settled in the region, they found only marshes and shallow water. The lake basin was broad, saline in places, prone to flooding, and seemingly inhospitable. But they saw not limitations, only possibilities. With perseverance and precision, they transformed the landscape. The first innovation was the Chinampa fan, misunderstood as a floating garden. But in truth, a fixed agricultural island constructed with incredible care. Builders began by staking out a rectangle in shallow water, using reeds and saplings. They filled this frame with layers of mud, lake sediment, and organic matter, creating a raised bed rich with nutrients. Willow trees were planted at the corners to stabilize the structure, their roots binding soil and wood together. These chinampas became lush fields, producing multiple harvests: a year maize, beans, squash, chilies, and flowers. Irrigated by the surrounding canals and fertilized by lake sediment, they were marvels of sustainable design. Entire neighborhoods of chinampas stretched out into the water, and families passed their skills from one generation to the next. In some parts of modern-day Xochimilco, a version of this method still survives. The Aztecs also mastered hydraulic engineering. To manage the water levels of the lake, especially during the rainy season, they constructed dikes and causeways. The most famous, the dike, was a massive barrier stretching several kilometers. Designed to separate the brackish eastern waters from the fresher western side, built with volcanic stone, packed earth, and woven red mats, it was not only functional but resilient. It helped regulate flooding and ensured the freshwater supply for drinking, irrigation, and ritual purity. Was connected to the mainland by 3 great causeways, wide enough to support both foot traffic and warriors in formation. These causeways were pierced by sluice gates and removable wooden bridges, which could be drawn up for defensive purposes in times of invasion or siege. The causeways weren't merely roads, they were defensible arteries, part of the city's living armor. Within the city, a network of canals and aqueducts ensured the movement of people and water. Canoes glided silently between neighborhoods. Aqueducts, built of stone and fed from springs in the nearby hills, brought clean water across long distances. The most famous, the Chapultepec Aqueduct, used dual pipes to allow for maintenance without disruption. It carried water into the city's heart, into public baths, fountains, and temples. Architecture in the Aztec world was more than practical, it was symbolic. Temples were built on elevated platforms, each layer representing a sacred layer of the cosmos. It's the great Templo Mayor, the twin pyramid at the center of Rose, from a broad base and 2 staircases, one leading to Huitzilopochtli, god of war and sun, the other to Tlaloc, god of rain and fertility. Each reconstruction added a new layer, quite literally, as the temple was rebuilt and expanded over time. The base structure, discovered beneath modern Mexico City, reveals these successive rings, like the growth rings of a tree. These buildings were adorned with carvings and colors, their surfaces painted in red ochre, white lime, blues, and yellows. Sculptors carved symbols into steps and altars, serpents, jaguars, suns, and water glyphs. Courtyards were paved in clean stone. Palaces were airy with columns, gardens, and bathing areas. Some had carved thrones and walls lined with murals, depictions of war, agriculture, or creation myths. Aztec builders made use of volcanic stone, such as tizantal and andesite, which were both abundant and durable. These stones were quarried from nearby hills and carried by human laborers or rafted in across the lake. Construction required teams of masons, diggers, woodworkers, plasterers, and painters. Projects were coordinated through the Calpulli, the neighborhood units, as a form of tribute and communal labor. But perhaps the most astonishing feature of Aztec engineering was how it all harmonized with nature. Their city was not imposed upon the landscape, but rose from its causeways tracing bird migration routes, its canals mimicking river branches, its temples aligned to celestial movements. The layout of echoed sacred geometry, with cardinal directions reflected in road placement, temple orientation, and ritual processions. Even waste management was innovative. Human waste was collected in containers, transported to the chinampas, and used as fertilizer. Public toilets, steam baths, and sweeping crews helped maintain hygiene. Markets were kept clean, and laws punished pollution of water sources. It was a city alive, self-contained, and efficient. And so, as the evening deepens and the lake reflects the fading sky, you might hear the soft splash of a canoe, the distant creak of a pulley, or the quiet rasp of a stonemason smoothing a wall for morning prayers. The city sleeps, but its form endures, a reflection of will, wisdom, and wonder. Let this image settle over your thoughts. City risen from the lake, stone by stone, canal by canal. Built not with wheels or beasts of burden, but with vision, sweat, and reverence. A city that glowed like a mirage and stood like a heartbeat at the center of the world. Segment 12. Gods in every corner. The pantheon of Aztec belief. Imagine the stillness before dawn, when even the market dogs are silent and mist hangs low over the canals. A priest, cloaked in cotton dyed with cochineal red, steps barefoot into a courtyard. He lifts his eyes to the east, awaiting the first golden breath of Tonatiuh, the sun god. He murmurs a prayer, offers a pinch of copal resin to the fire, and waits. Because every day, the world is reborn only if the gods will it. And for the Aztecs, Gods were not distant abstractions, they were everywhere. Aztec religion was not a neat list of tenets or a single figurehead deity. It was a complex living system, dense with symbolism and layers. Their pantheon contained hundreds of gods, many with overlapping domains, contradictory myths, and dual aspects. Yet at the center of it all was a clear truth. The world is fragile, sacred, and must be sustained. At the heart of the belief system were the 5 suns or ages of the world. The Aztecs believed that the current world was the 5th sun, preceded by 4 others that had ended in cataclysm wind, jaguars, rain of fire, and flood. We live, they believed, in an era sustained only through sacrifice, both divine and human. It is a world that teeters constantly between rebirth and ruin. Each god embodied not just a force, but a tension. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was the god of wind, wisdom, and creation. He was a bringer of maize and books, of calmness and order. Yet his counterpart, Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, represented chaos, sorcery, and fate. He could grant fortune and then snatch it away. Together, they told a story not of good versus evil, but of balance of order and entropy, always in flux. Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird god of war and sun, was the patron of the Mexica people. He led them in vision across the desert, to the spot where an eagle devouring a serpent on a cactus would reveal their destiny. Dead. Image became the foundation of, and Huitzilopochtli became the reason for conquest, expansion, and sacrifice. His temple stood high on the Templo Mayor. To him went the blood of captives not as cruelty, but as cosmic fuel to keep the sun rising. Tlaloc, the rain god, was another face of contradiction. Giver of water, fertility, and crops, but also a bringer of hailstorms, floods, and drought. His world was not one of kindness, but of necessity. Children were sometimes sacrificed to him, their tears mirroring the raindrops he would send. And yet farmers prayed to him with open hands, trusting that he understood their needs. Gods of maize and sustenance included Sentiotl, who embodied the growing corn, and 7 serpents, a goddess of fertility and plenty. In every cornfield, in every hand that ground maize for tortillas, they were present. It was said that the gods themselves had sacrificed their own blood to create maize for humans. To eat was to remember them. The calendar system was intertwined with divinity. The Tonalpahuli, a 260-day sacred cycle, matched days with gods, animals, elements, and fates. Each person's birthday carried omens, shaping their destiny. Priests known as Tinalpauk interpreted these signs, advising parents on names, professions, and rituals. Time itself was sacred. Every moment mattered. Temples stood not as silent structures, but as portals. The Templo Mayor mirrored the mythic mountain coat Pec, where Huitzilopochtli was born fully armed, defeating his siblings to become the sun. When priests reenacted these stories in blood and fire, they believed they were not merely honoring gods, but reactivating their deeds. The myth lived again, and so did the world. But not all worship was solemn or violent. There were festivals full of laughter, flowers, and music. During Tlaxcapalosli, warriors dressed in gold-painted skins and reenacted battles. During Exocohutsi, flowers rained from rooftops and dancers twirled through the streets. Entire neighborhoods would prepare for weeks, crafting costumes, baking special breads, preparing offerings of amaranth and honey. The home was also a temple. Families kept small altars. Daily rituals included incense burning, food offerings, and the observance of taboos. Midwives, farmers, artisans all honored patron gods. Even stonecutters had their divine protectors. Children were taught to revere the earth as a mother, to respect fire, to speak carefully, because everything held sacred energy. Death was not an end, but a journey. The soul's destination depended not on morality, but manner of death. Warriors and women who died in childbirth rose with the sun. Drownings went to Tlaloc's paradise. Ordinary deaths passed into Mictlan, a shadowy underworld, reached only after 4 years of trials, guided by the loyal dog, sacrificed and buried with the deceased. Perhaps most poetic was the Aztec belief that the gods had once bled to give life to humans. Thus, human offerings were not acts of cruelty, but of reciprocity. Life for life. The gods gave themselves to shape the world. Humans gave back in gratitude and necessity. to sustain the balance. And so, as you close your eyes now, imagine the gentle light of 1,000 fires glowing in temples and homes across the lake basin. A priest hums a prayer beneath a star-salted sky. A mother offers food to the household shrine. A child recites the names of gods as they fall asleep. In every corner of the Aztec world, the divine breathed quietly, watching, listening, waiting. This was their world, dense with gods, shimmering with symbolism, fragile and eternal. A world where every breath, every step, every sunrise was sacred. Segment 13. The Fall of Echoes of an Empire's End. Picture the grand city once more. Shining like a jewel at the center of the lake, its causeways stretching out like arms, its temples sharp against the sky. But now, imagine clouds gathering. Not clouds of rain or divine portent, but of ships, foreign tongues, and horses creatures, unknown in this land. It begins not with thunder, but with the soft creak of sails on the horizon. In Yitan Wubai Yishudu, a Spanish conquistador driven by ambition and gold, landed on the Gulf Coast. Accompanied by a few hundred men, strange weapons, and the weight of European desire, he moved inland. The Aztecs had never seen men in armor, beasts like horses, or tools that could breathe fire and shatter shields from afar, but was not alone. He allied with enemies of the Mexica discontented city-states, pressed by tribute and conquest, most notably the fierce Tlaxcalans. The Mexica, under Emperor Moctezuma II, watched the foreign presence with unease. Prophecies spoke of the return of gods, of omens in the sky, of birds with mirrors in their eyes. And when Cortes finally reached the Valley of Mexico, Moctezuma did not respond with war, but with caution and hospitality. The Spanish were welcomed in November 1519. Housed in the palace of Ixayacotl, guests in the very heart of the empire, but the welcome masked a growing tension. The Spanish, amazed by the grandeur of the city, soon became restless. They seized Moctezuma as a hostage, attempting to rule through him. The relationship unraveled quickly. After a massacre at the Great Temple, where Spanish soldiers attacked unarmed celebrants during a festival, the city erupted. The Aztecs rose, stone against steel, voice against gunfire, and his men fled on what became known as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. In June 1520, they crossed the causeways under fire, many drowning under the weight of stolen gold. Moctezuma, once emperor, died whether by Spanish hands, Aztec rebellion, or grief, no one can say. His death marked the end of a chapter, but not the fall. The Spanish regrouped. They returned with thousands of indigenous allies. By May of 1521, they began the siege of it lasted nearly 3 months. The city, once fed by aqueduct and lake, was cut off. The canals became battlegrounds. The chinampas burned. Disease, most devastatingly smallpox, swept through the population. Introduced by the Europeans, it decimated not just armies, but families, priests, and elders. The social fabric frayed. The defenders under the new emperor fought with astonishing resolve. They knew every alley, every rooftop, every waterway. They ambushed from canoes, set traps in narrow streets, and refused surrender. Even as hunger deepened and the temples fell, they fought on. But the city was being slowly erased, block by block. On August 13th, 1521 was captured. The fighting ended, but the loss had already taken root. The city lay in ruins, its temples pulled down, its streets choked with the dead. The Spanish would build their new capital atop the wreckage, stone over stone. Where once stood the Templo Mayor, now stood a cathedral. Where maize was ground for ritual, now bells tolled for mass. Yet the end was not truly an end. Survivors carried songs and stories into exile. Children born in the rubble learned both Nahuatl and Spanish. Indigenous scribes began writing their histories, often in secret, using European letters to preserve native voices. The spirit of the empire, though broken, was not forgotten. In modern Mexico City today, the ruins lie just beneath the surface, literally and figuratively. Beneath the streets, beneath the cathedrals, fragments of the old world persist. And in the language, art, cuisine, and memory of Mexico, echoes of the Aztec world still breathe. So now, as the night deepens and the sounds of conquest fade into stillness, remember this: empires rise and empires fall. But the lives of those within them, their hopes, songs, and sorrows, do not vanish. They shift like the wind over water, like the stars over a sleeping lake. Let the weight of time settle softly upon you. The city is quiet now, but beneath your feet, beneath your dreams, the stones still remember. Segment sure said, beyond. Life in the provinces and borderlands. Imagine yourself waking not to the sounds of market chatter or temple drums, but to the rustling of trees in a highland forest, or to the dry hum of wind through cactus on a southern plain. Life in the Aztec Empire was not confined to its dazzling capital. In fact, most of its subjects lived in the province's tributary cities, border towns and villages nestled in valleys, clinging to hillsides, or settled along coastlines. These people, far from the ceremonial center, formed the true body of the empire. The Aztec world was a patchwork of city-states, or alt-pedal, each with its own ruler, traditions, and local deities. After conquest, these communities remained politically semi-independent, but were bound to the Mexica by tribute and allegiance. The tribute system was the lifeblood of the empire. Local leaders Tlatoani were expected to collect goods from their people: maize, cacao, textiles, obsidian, salt, feathers, jade, and more. These offerings were sent to the capital as scheduled quotas, their amounts carefully recorded in pictorial codices. Tribute was not merely taxation, it was also symbolic subordination. The arrival of tribute runners, laden with goods, was a statement that the center still held sway over the edge. And yet life in these distant regions continued in old rhythms: planting, weaving, fishing, raising families, unchanged from generations before the Mexica came. Some provinces were renowned for particular products. Steamy lowlands near the Gulf Coast supplied cotton and cacao. Salt flats near Texcoco provided crystalline salt. The Mixtec regions in the south sent gold and turquoise. Mountain villages harvested obsidian. The sheer geographic diversity of the empire was staggering, and the economy thrived on it. Canoes, foot messengers, and merchant caravans wove the distant provinces into a single beating system. Still, not all regions accepted Aztec rule willingly. Some resisted fiercely, retreating into hills, engaging in guerrilla tactics, or offering tribute only reluctantly. The Tlaxcalans, famously, never submitted, remaining a proud and independent rival state. Others, like the Tarascans, have resisted Aztec conquest entirely, matching the Mexica in power and defending their borders with iron weapons technology rare in Mesoamerica. In quieter provinces, life followed seasonal rhythms. Families rose before dawn to tend milpas, small plots of maize intercropped with beans and squash. Children helped gather firewood or water, or scattered cornmeal to the family's backyard altar. Communal labor tachia was a regular part of life. Villagers would gather to build irrigation ditches, repair temples, or aid in harvests. There was strength in the collective. Many villages had Kamakac or Telpoch-Kali schools, depending on status and local customs. Boys learned songs, history, and discipline. Girls learned weaving, cooking, and ritual offerings. Despite distance from the capital, religious observance remained central. Local gods were honored with festivals, music, and offerings. But the great deities of War also revered us, especially if their temples had been erected by imperial decree. Intermarriage between ruling families helped cement loyalty. Daughters of noble houses were often married into Mexican nobility or priesthood, forming bonds that crossed language and landscape, yet regional identity remained strong. Local dress, dialects, and art forms persisted. The empire absorbed diversity not by erasing it, but by overlaying it with ritual and tribute. In the borderlands, places where jungle met plain or mountain met desert, life was harder. These were frontiers, where roads were poor, bandits were common, and the empire's grip was lighter. Communities here were often more autonomous. Stories of resistance brewed. Here, people told tales not only of gods, but of emperors they would never see, and wars fought far away. Festivals in these towns were more modest, but no less heartfelt. Dancers with masks carved from wood spun in dusty courtyards. Fireworks made from hollow reeds popped in the dark. Musicians plucked at turtle-shell drums and bone flutes. Feasts featured maize tamales wrapped in leaves, local fruits pulque fermented from maguey, and when imperial tax collectors came, the mood would shift. Villagers lined up to deliver their share, sometimes in silence, sometimes with quiet resentment. Not all viewed the Mexica as protectors. Some remembered conquests, lost freedom, and the burden of tribute. But others appreciated the trade routes, the roads, the order. Even in far-flung corners, news of empire trickled in. Traveling poets recited epic songs. Priests spread word of omens. Traders brought gossip from the capital, new rulers, new wars, strange visitors with pale skin and thunder weapons. And as the 16th century dawned, these rumors became real, and the edges of the empire began to tremble. But before the fall, before the invaders crossed the mountains, life in the provinces continued much as it had for generations. A child was born beneath a thatched roof. A pot was fired in a hillside kill. A ritual was performed for rain. A father watched his son learn to use a digging stick. These small acts, quiet and enduring, were the foundation of an empire. And now, as your thoughts drift like smoke through the valleys of the past, remember this. Power may rise in capitals, but life is lived in the spaces between, fields and homes and forgotten borderlands. There the Aztec world whispered its truth, not in conquest or stone, but in breath and soil. Segment 15. After the Empire. Survival, memory, and the Nahua world today. After the fall of the Spanish did not merely conquer a city, they began the long and difficult process of reshaping a world. Churches were raised atop temples, Spanish words replaced Nahuatl terms in government, and Christian rites were introduced with fire and fear. But for all their might, the new rulers could not erase everything. The homes, the kitchens, the stories told at night, the Nahua world endured. Life after the conquest was marked by profound change. Indigenous nobility, those who once ruled over provinces and cities, were gradually folded into the colonial system. Some were given titles Donanan made intermediaries between Spanish governors and their native communities. Others were stripped of power entirely. Still, the Calpuli, the neighborhood unit, continued to organize land, labor, and local life, much as before. A remarkable act of survival came in the form of writing. Before the conquest, the Mexica and other Nahua peoples used pictographic codices to record tribute, genealogy, and ritual. After the arrival of the Spanish, many learned to write in the Latin alphabet, recording their histories in Nahuatl, their native tongue. These text annals, relaciones, and preserved memories of the past from the indigenous point of view. In these pages, we hear the voices of those who lived through both empires. One of the most famous was the Florentine Codex, compiled by Fray Bernardino D., with the help of Nahua elders and scribes. It spans 12 books and gods, daily life, medicine, history, and serves as both an encyclopedia and a eulogy for a fading world. Through it, we see the delicacy of a tortilla pressed by hand, the scent of incense curling in a quiet courtyard, the rhythm of poetry sung beneath a tree. In the rural highlands and valleys of central Mexico, Nahuatl continued to be spoken, though generations passed it from parent to child, even as official edicts demanded Spanish. Rituals evolved, some disguised beneath Christian festivals, others quietly preserved. The Day of the Dead, for example, reflects both Catholic All Saints' Day and ancient practices honoring the departed with food, candles, and marigolds. It is a fusion of worlds, layered like earth and stone. Artisans continued to shape pottery, weave cloth, and carve wood with symbols and designs older than the conquest. Cooks prepared tamales and mole with recipes rooted in pre-Columbian kitchens. Midwives, herbalists, and spiritual healers practiced in whispers, treating both the body and the spirit. The Temazcal, the traditional steam bath, remained a space for cleansing and rebirth. In many Nahua towns, oral tradition was the thread that bound past and present. Grandparents told stories of migration and gods, of the eagle and the cactus, of cities swallowed by lakes. These stories, passed in soft voices across generations, kept the heart of the culture alive even as maps changed and flags were redrawn. Today, Nahuatl is still spoken by over 1 million people across Mexico. It has evolved, as all living languages do, but its structure, rhythm, and soul endure. In classrooms and universities, in community centers and village squares, it is being taught and reclaimed. Young poets compose in Nahuatl. Scholars transcribe old codices. Artists paint in the colors of the fifth sun. In modern Mexico City, just steps from the ruins of the Templo Mayor have been unearthed. Beyond the capital, in rural towns like Huyapan, Milpa Alta, or Cutzalan, Nahua, communities live. The Aztec Empire, as a political force, may have ended, but the Nahua people remain. They're not frozen in time nor lost to history. They've adapted, resisted, and reimagined their world again and again. They are part of the modern nation, yet proudly distinct. They walk with ancestors at their side and speak with voices that carry centuries. So, as this long journey comes to a close, rest your thoughts in the slow, enduring pulse of a culture tea. Let your breathing slow, in rhythm with the ancient world. Feel the hush of wind through maze, the weight of time, the peace of continuity. Sleep now, in the memory of. Beneath obsidian skies, beside Wat,